Alright, hey everybody. Today we're headed up a bouldery wash in search of some petroglyphs. Come along with us for this hike. This is such a magnificent landscape. This bouldery wash that we're climbing through feels so mysterious. The volcanic landscape here dates back 1.2 million years, but the most recent eruption took place about 17,000 years ago during the Pleistocene era. And then if you look ahead, off in the distance are the high peaks of the Sierra. In wetter years, this wash here, this creek that we're in, would probably flow with water and be hospitable to the wildlife of the area. So this is not our first time in this canyon and not our first time in this area searching for these petroglyphs. We were up here, if you were watching the channel last year, midwinter, we were up here looking for them. We took a wrong turn. We kept going higher and higher and we had no idea where these petroglyphs were. The publication that we were using had really bad directions to find this petroglyph site. And so instead of coming up this canyon, we ended up taking a turn up a fairly rough road, and it was snowy and we had no idea where we were going, and so our adrenaline was pretty high in that episode, and we never ended up finding them because we were completely in the wrong direction. Oh, quail? Rock formations like these can be mesmerizing. To think that they were formed hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago puts into context the immensity of this landscape. There's something about a mountainous view. There was no shortage of wildlife to be seen today, like this northern harrier out on the hunt. When you look closely, you can see the ecosystem at work. So right now we're totally being circled by turkey vultures. Turkey vultures have an exceptional sense of smell, allowing them to locate carcasses miles away. Their bald heads help prevent rotting flesh from sticking to their feathers. This volcanic ravine that we are walking through would have been carved by the flow of water over the course of tens of thousands of years, and one can still see the patterns of that movement in this flat, sandy surface where to this day, water still accumulates, and in the rounded and smooth edges of rocks like these. There was little shade in this canyon, and we could feel the rays of the sun beating down upon us. Considering that we were still only in early spring, I thought about how this was unlikely an area people spent much time in the warmer days of summer. So this hike is really incredible. It's taken us from the desert, a much drier terrain, through this canyon into what is going to turn out to be the high mountain meadows. And I was thinking a lot in that regard about my motivation for hiking. You know, I love seeing petroglyphs. I love trying to interpret the symbolism of what the ancient inhabitants of these lands were intending. But I think what I realized is the reason why I love searching for petroglyphs is not only for the symbolism and not only to find them and to marvel at, ancient human beings, but maybe even more so, I love finding petroglyphs because those types of hikes bring you to places that you would otherwise not go. There's no way we would have ended up in this canyon today had it not been for the petroglyphs. So for us, these petroglyphs bring us here. But there was something else that brought the ancient inhabitants here, and that was the abundance of wildlife and plant life and water. And so it's a win-win. Not only do we get to see the creations of ancient man, they are essentially guiding us into these places in the desert that most people would never otherwise go, into these really, really sacred spots. Sacred not only because of what people did here, but really sacred because of the beauty of nature. And I think that is ultimately what I hope to find when we go hiking. Pretty soon, we came upon our first petroglyphs scattered upon the walls of the volcanic rock. There were hundreds of petroglyphs, wheels and sunbursts and other strange formations, and as I looked at them, a story started to unfold. Was this a winter camp along a deer migration route where hunters stalked game traveling to and from the mountains? Looking around, I couldn't help but notice that this spot was perfectly set between mountain peaks and the valley below, and the thought struck me that hunters must have followed the migrating deer herds over the passes of the High Sierra down to the river over the course of several weeks, if not months, all the while taking their killings and returning their spoils to their tribe. And what about these holes? Although these volcanic rocks are porous, these particular ones seem peculiar. Were these holes expanded by ancient hunters as a place to leave belongings, or did they serve some other ceremonial purpose? As we looked around, we were left with more questions than answers, and despite any theories I might have created, the mystery of the canyon still remained. This one almost looks like a map, and these are all the creeks that make their way down the mountain. Maybe this is the main creek, and these guys are all flowing off to the sides. There was something different about this petroglyph. Perhaps it was its sheer size or placement, but it seemed to tell a story, have some sort of greater significance than the rest. Whether it is a map or a vortex is unclear, but it did seem to be the defining feature of this area. Upon closer inspection, I can't help but think that this is an illustration of the game migration route through these mountains. I traced over some of the lines and seem to have been able to make out the outline of a bighorn sheep image, as well as what appears to be movement patterns heading northwest. So if you've been watching the channel, you know that we come across a lot of petroglyphs. And the past few days, we've seen hundreds of petroglyphs. And it can be frustrating because after a while, they may all start to look the same. Or because we don't know exactly what they mean, it could be a little bit frustrating because it just looks like, at some point, it can start to look like scribbles on the wall. But they're not scribbles, and they are important, and it shouldn't be frustrating. So I think what's important to do when you're in these spots and you're observing them is to try to, as best you can, step into the shoes of those people who lived here. Try to step into their mindset and try to imagine what they might have been intending to convey. I know a lot of people think that the petroglyphs are just child's play or something like that. I disagree for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to get into. I think, on the other hand, that they do have deep symbolism and deep meaning, of which we'll never know. But that doesn't mean we cannot try to imagine, try to interpret. And so I think it behooves us when we are in these spots to come up with a story that makes sense to us. And rather than leave these spots feeling like kind of dumbfounded, I find that trying to build that story and leaving with a greater sense of what these petroglyphs are all about and what the people that were doing here were thinking is really crucial. So those are my thoughts for the day. I want to thank you guys for joining us on this episode of Artistic Off-Road. It's been a great adventure. Please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.